Friends, Romans, countrymen, howdy y'all. My name is Rory, I'm a writer, reader, a zine maker, and today I want to sit down and chat with you guys while I weed my bookshelves and decide what to keep versus what to let go. This video will be split into a couple different sections. First of all, a quick bookshelf tour, second, a walkthrough of all the different books that I'm going to be getting rid of today, and finally, a chat where I'm going to touch upon issues of sustainability and impact in book communities, and also why I don't automatically weed out books by problematic authors. So if you're tuning in, I recommend you sit down, get comfy, grab a cup of tea, and settle in. So my flatmates and I have a total of 5 bookshelves in our house, and of those 5, 4 of them are in my room because I have a lot of books. You may well ask, Rory, are the bookshelves in question organized? And I tell you, sort of. One shelf is dedicated to miscellaneous academic nonfiction, 2 are dedicated to fiction, 1 is dedicated to comic books specifically, and the final shelf is dedicated to just material on post-colonialism, since that's a pretty major topic of study for me. Within each shelf, I typically group books by subsection. So here you can find all the material on folklore is together, all the medieval stuff is together, etc., etc. I don't hardcore alphabetize or anything, but I do tend to group works by the same author together, unless the works in question are about different subjects, which honestly isn't that common with nonfiction anyway. For fiction, I tend to just stick stuff on the shelves at random. Again, I'll try to group works by the same author, but I'm not super strict with it, as I'm sure you'll notice. Although I am weeding both fiction and nonfiction today, I'm not going to be weeding very much from my post-colonialism shelf, just because it's kind of under renovation right now. It's very messy and chaotic because I've been moving stuff around, but I will be showing you everything that I've decided to get rid of, as well as talking about my weeding process and how I go about making those decisions. When I set out to downsize my book collection, I evaluated each book based on a set of criteria. 1, for unread books, how long have I owned this copy? And 2, for books I have read, do I plan to reread this? And then finally, does this book have some kind of meaningful significance to me? Am I emotionally attached to it, or is it just another book on my shelf? After evaluating each book, I separated my pile of weeded books into 4 distinct categories: classic lit, contemporary fiction I have read, contemporary fiction I have not read, and academic nonfiction. The first book in the classic lit category is this tiny little volume of Abraham Lincoln's poetry. And if you're thinking, I didn't know that Abraham Lincoln wrote poetry, me neither, until someone gave me this book. This was gifted to me by my boss at the newspaper I used to work for. I did work in journalism for a couple years, and my boss gave me this book to thank me for my service to the newspaper. At the time, I was really touched that she thought of me, and while I still have warm memories of that job, I left it a pretty long time ago, and I just don't have strong feelings about Abe Lincoln's poetry. Like, it's fine, but at the end of the day, I don't think it needs to stay on my bookshelf. The next book is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. I've read it, I think it's a good book, but I don't care enough about it to hang on to my own personal copy of it, especially after discovering other books by African authors that explore the same issues but in more authentic and compelling ways. Okay, so the next book is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima. Oh boy, where do I even start with this guy? Mishima is a fascinating historical figure. He was a model, he was a writer, and he was an outspoken fascist. I picked up a copy of this book like a decade ago because I was curious about his work. I would say morbidly curious because he's such a bizarre figure. I never ended up reading it though. It has literally sat on my shelf for years, and I'm still interested in Yukio Mishima, but I think that if I ever do pick up his work again, I'm probably going to listen on audiobook. Next up is this giant anthology of work by Edgar Allan Poe. I got this book in high school. I was in my goth phase. I mean, I'm still in my goth phase, but back in high school I was really in my goth phase, okay? I was in deep. So I wanted to read all of this classic gothic literature. Look how meaty this book is. This is a thick tome. I do like Edgar Allan Poe, but I don't need this giant collection of his work in my house. I'm not rereading his stuff often enough to justify owning this book. Okay, the next category is for contemporary literature, and actually there are only 2 books in this category. These are contemporary books that I have already read. The first one is Rotgut by H.S. Wolfe. This is an indie horror novella. I really liked it. I do recommend it, but I don't think I'm gonna reread it, so I'm giving it away to a friend. I think it's really important to support indie authors, especially queer indie authors, so I'm gonna stick a link in the description so that you can get your own copy of Wolfe's work. This book is good, but actually my favorite book by this author is his earlier novella, The Garden of Echo, which I do plan to reread, so I am holding onto my copy of that. The second piece of contemporary lit that I'm letting go of is this poetry collection by Lana Del Rey. Full disclosure, I do listen to her music. I'm not like a super fan, but she does have some good songs. When this collection came out, I was curious about her poetry, so I snagged a copy, and having read it, I think Lana's talents are better allocated in the music industry. I'll put it that way. She's not a bad poet, she's just fine. Just like Abraham Lincoln. Like, she's fine, her poetry is whatever to me. Goodbye, Lana. The next category of books that I'm getting rid of is stuff I was required to purchase for college classes, or books that are school-related in some way. I'm not in school anymore, and I've been out of school for a while, so there's really just no reason for me to keep hanging on to these books. This category was the largest by far, so I had to split it into 2 stacks. I'm not going to go through each of these books individually, but I will comment upon a couple of them. The only book here that I purchased voluntarily is the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, which I actually bought when I started teaching because my English classes all have a creative writing component, like a creative writing module, I guess, and I wanted to approach teaching creative writing in the most equitable way possible. If you're a teacher, I definitely recommend this book. I feel comfortable letting it go now because I've been teaching for a couple years and I've reached a place where I feel I've learned all that I can from this book. But again, I would recommend it. I think it's worth your money. Next up, we have So You Want to Talk About Race. This book gets recommended online pretty often, so I decided to check it out, and I realize this may be an unpopular opinion, but I don't think this book is actually that good. This may be because I'm coming from a background where I've already done a lot of research into post-colonial theory, and also some of the stuff in this book is pretty personal. I have some personal experience with the things that are described in this book. But ultimately, I found the discussions of race in this book to be pretty shallow, very surface level. I do think the book is probably really good for, like, white people who are totally new to talking about race. This is the kind of book that's perfect for your white friend's parents, if that makes sense. It's very entry-level stuff, which I'm sure is helpful for a lot of people. However, if you are racially marginalized in some way, this book isn't going to teach you anything you don't already know. The final category is contemporary fiction, so not classics, that I own copies of but have never read. The first book is a compendium of modern Irish writers. This sounds really interesting, but I don't actually read short stories very often, so goodbye. Next up is Death by Water by Kenzaburo Oe. I bought this book because it sounded cool, but it has sat on my shelf for years at this point, so I'm finally accepting that I'm just never gonna read it. I'm gonna keep it on my TBR list, but if I do end up reading it, it'll definitely be on audiobook. I do not need this sitting on my shelf for any longer than it already has. Next up is Astragal by Albertine Sarrazin. I bought this book in high school because it was marketed as an accessory to French New Wave cinema. In addition to my goth phase, I also had a New Wave phase in high school. I was very pretentious and annoying, I promise. If you didn't know me in high school, thank God for that. Yeah, I've had this book for ages, and I have never read it, and I'm never gonna read it, so goodbye. The next book I'm getting rid of is Traveling Cat Chronicles. This book came highly recommended by an artist I follow, but like so many other books, it has sat unread on my shelf for over 3 years, which means I'm never gonna read it, and I should give it a new home with a reader who is actually going to appreciate it. The last book I'm getting rid of is Skyfaring by Mark van Hoenacker. I bought this book because it had a cool cover, but I started reading it and it was kind of boring, so I think it's time to let it go. This is the part of the video where I really want to sit down and talk about a couple issues in the book community, including hoarding habits and why I don't automatically weed out books by problematic authors. Since maturing into adulthood, I've come to realize that I have a lot of hoarding tendencies. If I was to armchair psychoanalyze myself, I'd probably guess that I learned these behaviors in childhood. My mother's side of the family are refugees, so they tend to hoard resources out of trauma, and I definitely picked up this habit when I was growing up. My family's income also fluctuated a lot when I was a kid. There were times when we were very low income, but also times when we were middle class. And because of all that chaos and fluctuation, the importance of saving your resources for hard times was really deeply ingrained in me as a kid. In adulthood, I'm trying my best to confront these habits and the reasons behind them, which means I need to get better about letting things go when they're no longer serving me. Part of that process is evaluating my books in terms of the time I'm prepared to commit with regard to actually reading them. If a book sits on my shelf for longer than 2 years without being read, that's a sign I don't care enough about that book to pick it up. Another way I've been downsizing my book collection is letting go of books that I own multiple copies of. That includes special editions. So, for example, I recently gave away my original copy of Angels Before Man because I pre-ordered the special edition. I'm not really a special edition sort of person, but this particular edition features illustrations by an artist that I've admired for a long time, so I decided this one was worth it. That said, I don't need 2 editions of this book, right? Like, there just isn't any reason to have 2 different copies, which meant that I was happy to let my original trade paperback go. During my last round of weeding, I ended up getting rid of all my duplicate copies, with the exception of the Silmarillion, which I still own 2 copies of. One is my trade paperback, which I reread, annotate, take with me on road trips, take with me on planes, throw down the stairs, you name it. My other copy is a first edition that was gifted to me by a dear friend, and occupies a place of honor on my bookshelf. I think this is a good example of how my new book collecting philosophy works. I'm holding on to 2 copies of the same book, one for practical purposes and one for sentimental reasons. I love my first edition because it was a gift from someone I love, but also because it fills me with nostalgia. When I read the Silmarillion for the first time, I checked it out of my local library, and this was the exact copy that library had. So when I flip back through this, I get to appreciate the story and the beautiful artwork, but I also get to relive how I felt the first time I read the book, and I think there's something special about that. Now, as I was going through the list of books I'm giving up, I'm sure you might have noticed which authors are not on here, and that's something I want to talk about. A couple of my friends are booksellers. They work in bookstores that buy back used books from customers, and something they've told me is that they can tell which authors are currently having scandals based on how frequently people start selling their copies of those authors' books. Take Neil Gaiman, for example. If you live under a rock, or perhaps a cave in the mountains and you don't already know, Neil Gaiman was exposed a couple months ago as an abuser. If you want to read more about this, I'll link the main source for these claims in the description. It's a really thorough article connecting the timeline of Gaiman's abusive behavior to his upbringing in the Church of Scientology. It's a harrowing read, so proceed with caution, but I do genuinely think the article is an excellent piece of journalism. So, a friend of mine who works at a bookstore recently mentioned that since the Neil Gaiman scandal broke, customers have been selling their used copies of Gaiman's work at unprecedented rates. And part of the problem with that is there's no one to buy back these books from used bookstores. As my friend put it, as of February 20th, the amount of Neil Gaiman books rotting on our shelves is staggering. And ultimately, this is nobody's fault, right? The only party at fault here is Gaiman himself. You can't blame readers for wanting to disavow and distance themselves from his work, given that we now know he's an evil Scientologist who abuses women. That said, the reselling trend does contribute to waste and sustainability problems further down the line. Used bookshops and libraries often have to weed materials that don't sell or don't get checked out, and typically they have no choice but to throw those books in the garbage, meaning that all those copies of Neil Gaiman books that used to sit on your shelf at home are probably going to end up in a landfill one day, and that sucks. My advice for people watching this video is to look into methods of book recycling that minimize landfill waste. You can always reach out to reuse centers in your area, and I'd also encourage you to get creative about how to turn an unwanted book into a new object, either by reusing the pages to make pulp fibers for new ones, or through some other method. There are tons of resources online about upcycling old books and reclaiming materials for new purposes. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is that I have some more personal reasons for not wanting to automatically get rid of books by problematic authors, and it has to do with intention versus impact. Whenever an author does something terrible, there's always a big rush among readers to publicly disavow their work. And most of the time this is just common sense, right? Like, why would you want to consume work by an author who's done something awful? But I also believe that some part of this disavowal rush is performative. It's not just about distancing yourself from a problematic author, it's about being seen to have done so. And there isn't anything inherently wrong with that, but I do sometimes get the sense that we as readers do this so that we don't have to confront the cognitive dissonance that arises between a creator's work and their actions. To use another example, after J.K. Rowling became a transphobe, lots of her former fans started saying things like, "Oh, she was always a terrible writer, she was never good at writing." And while I do have some empathy for ex-Harry Potter fans, especially trans ex-Harry Potter fans, this behavior is an obvious cope. And moreover, I think that this particular brand of cope allows readers to disengage from meaningful criticism that might be leveled against not only Rowling's politics, but also the political ideologies that underscore her work. You cannot truly separate the art from the artist, not because the art is a literal extension of the artist, but because art isn't created in a vacuum. It has to be created by a real human being with biases and perspectives of their own. This is actually something that kind of frustrates me about the ways readers are discussing the Neil Gaiman situation. I saw a video the other day on my For You page where the caption basically claimed that readers should disengage from Gaiman's work because his characters are a direct fictional representation of himself. I'm sorry, but to me, this kind of rhetoric is literalist brain rot. Like, sure, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman always joked about which of them was more like Crowley and which was more like Aziraphale, and some of the marketing for Good Omens did lean into that. But that is not why you should be boycotting Gaiman's books. You should be boycotting Gaiman's books because he abuses women, full stop. I really don't like this literalist rhetoric because, in addition to just being a bizarre way of engaging with art and media, I feel that it also obfuscates the perpetrator, if that makes sense. The fictional characters created by Neil Gaiman didn't abuse all those women, Neil Gaiman did. A more accurate criticism of Gaiman might be that he used the success of his books to gain access to vulnerable women and exploit them, or that his attitude about women and power surfaced repeatedly in his creative works. This video is not an essay or an article or a research piece. but if it was, I would need text evidence to back up the points that I just made. And that's the reason I don't automatically throw away books by problematic authors. If I decided to do a deep dive or write a research piece on Neil Gaiman or Freydis Moon or Sarah J. Maas or someone else who's been involved in some kind of scandal, I would necessarily be forced to engage with their work in some way, especially if they used their books to facilitate their exploitation of others. And to put it simply, I can't do that if I've thrown away all my copies. That's the issue, right? It's the issue of intent versus impact right there. Buying more copies of Gaiman's books to replace the ones I threw away, or even checking them out from the library, inadvertently supports Gaiman financially, so that would be the wrong thing to do. As a critic, it's important to me that I don't put myself in a position where I have to give my money to a problematic author in order to properly do the work of criticizing them. Getting rid of all your books by problematic authors might make you feel like you're doing something good, but ultimately it has very little impact on the actual victims. Volunteering at a women's shelter is going to have much more impact on abuse victims than tossing all your Neil Gaiman books in the trash. Donating to a trans person's GoFundMe page is going to have way more positive impact than throwing away all those Harry Potter books you already spent money on anyway. I don't want to belabor the point, so I think I'm going to cap this video here. If you made it this far and you're still watching, thanks. I just started out on YouTube. I haven't been making videos for very long, but I'm really enjoying it, and if you want to stick around and give me a follow, that's cool. If you want to keep up with my other work, you can follow me on various social media platforms at GilHooligan. If you have thoughts on this video or you want to share your own book reading process, feel free to comment down below. Peace out, y'all.